Putin at Xi Jinping's feet.
Respected Mr. Chairman,
Russia has completely submitted to China.
the investor is our emperor.
Russia sells oil to China for next to nothing and sells gas at a loss. It lets them clear-cut thousands of hectares of its forests.
They chopped it all down, ruined the entire Russian taiga.
It hands over its own land to Chinese firms, along with the people on it.
We used to be people. Now we're basically slaves.
Russian businesses are going bankrupt under China's expansion. The yuan is becoming the main currency on the Moscow exchange. Russia's economy is now chained to China. Without Chinese handouts, it collapses. How did Russia lose its sovereignty for good? Why is it destroying its own economy, trading national wealth for cheap, made-in-China goods? And what does Putin really get in return from his chairman? Watch in the special report, Vassal of China, how Russia fell into dependence on the PRC. He arrived in Russia for an inspection, like its new owner. That is how many international observers described Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow back in 2023. Even then it was obvious. Russia was falling into China's hands like ripe fruit.
Respected Mr. Chairman,
This was driven by a chain of events. It started with Putin's decision to launch a full-scale war against Ukraine. Sanctions and international isolation followed. Hundreds of Western companies left the Russian market. Then the dictator tried to cut off gas to Europe, hoping the EU would freeze and abandon Kiev. Europe did not freeze. It found other suppliers. Russia lost its richest and most reliable gas market. Later came Western sanctions on oil, coal, aluminum, copper, nickel, gold, and a long list of other restrictions on imports from Russia. By cutting itself off from Western markets, Russia became economically dependent on China. It was forced to pivot entirely to the PRC, selling gas, oil, coal, and other natural resources there. Trading with Europe was profitable. With China, it is different. Russia must offer massive discounts and accept any terms dictated by Chairman Xi.
our Chinese friends are tough negotiators.
Those Chinese friends are twisting Putin's arm. The gas situation says it all. Xi Jinping knows Russia has nowhere else to send it. Before, Russia extracted gas and sold it straight to Europe. Now it has to pump it into storage. 70 billion cubic meters are already sitting there, filled to the limit. The Kremlin has little choice. Either shut down production and seal wells, or sell gas at any price, even at a loss, just to get rid of it. China takes it for pennies. $125 per 1,000 cubic meters, many times below the market price. For comparison, EU countries buy gas from suppliers at around $450 per 1,000 cubic meters. Putin tries to justify it, saying Asia is not Europe.
Prices differ across regions. Europe has one price, Asia has another.
China buys Russian gas for almost nothing. Yet Putin wants to build another pipeline there to sell even more gas for scraps. For years, the Kremlin has pushed the Power of Siberia 2 project. It still exists only on paper. China has not approved construction. It simply does not need that much gas. But the Kremlin keeps begging and is even ready to cover all the costs.
The investment will never pay off. The government is pushing to start work on Power of Siberia 2 as soon as possible. Another non-commercial project. It is pure show. It is posturing. In reality, we are paying China to agree to take our gas.
Why does Russia need any of this? Even loyal Kremlin propagandists are asking Putin that question at economic forums.
These prices will be lower than Europe's. So what do you think? Should we just hand over the power of Siberia to China?
Trying to hide his irritation, Putin falls back on excuses again. Russia needs somewhere, anywhere, to sell its gas.
It is a mutually beneficial project.
Putin claims he has already agreed with Xi Jinping on building Power of Siberia 2. They signed a document that Russia called a binding memorandum. To any economist, that sounds absurd. A memorandum is, by definition, a statement of intent with no legal force.
This is pure newspeak. The term binding directly contradicts the word memorandum. It is simply a declaration with the word binding added to it, but in reality it binds no one to anything. It contains no specific terms and has no legal force whatsoever.
The document is missing the key point: the price China commits to pay for gas from Power of Siberia 2. Russia must build the project first, on its own. That costs enormous money. The pipeline would run nearly 7,000 kilometers. Only then, maybe, but not guaranteed, China will agree to buy the fuel, and it will dictate the price on its own terms. The International Energy Agency already predicts the price could fall below production cost, meaning Russia would sell gas at a loss. China exploits Russia's desperation. It dictates prices for Russian oil too. It buys it with huge discounts. Right now, the discount is about $20 per barrel. Russia loses billions of dollars every month because of it. Coal looks similar. In 2022, China agreed to buy Russian coal only at rock-bottom prices. 2 years later, as if to mock Moscow, it introduced tariffs. Now coal shipments have dropped sharply. In the end, coal mines in Russia's Kuzbass lost the European market at the start of the full-scale war and found no rescue in China. This kind of partnership, where prices and volumes keep falling, does not even let an industry stay afloat.
We are already seeing a catastrophe. Nearly the entire coal industry in Russia is running at a loss. Many companies are collapsing. Whole single industry towns depend on coal, leaving the Kemerovo region in deep trouble.
Betting on China is driving Russia to the edge. Russia is now fully dependent on the PRC. Most of its natural wealth goes there. Before the full-scale war, Russia had many export markets. Now it is limited to Asia, India, and mostly China. Russia has become an economic dwarf, next to China. Without the PRC, Russia's economy collapses. It is already tied to China's financial system. Russia sells raw materials and receives yuan in return. The yuan has become the main currency on the Moscow exchange. According to Russia's central bank, its share is already 99%. The central bank also holds most reserves in yuan. But the yuan is not freely convertible. Its circulation is fully controlled by the Chinese authorities. This means vital payments are now decided not in Moscow, but in Beijing. Putin is no longer an independent leader. He is fully dependent on Xi Jinping.
He is the man who can strip Putin of power and influence. If Xi Jinping says tomorrow we are not buying anything from Russia for a week or 2 weeks, that is it. Putin is finished.
At the start of the war, Russia lost the European market, its main profitable, stable, long-standing market. It was forced to turn toward China and has become a supplier of raw materials. Russia is sliding into the role of an underdeveloped vassal of China.
This is obvious even in how Putin's rhetoric has changed over recent years. Just months before the full-scale invasion, he claimed sovereignty was everything to him.
Either a country is sovereign or it is a colony. You can call it whatever you want. But if a country cannot make sovereign decisions, it is already, to some extent, a colony.
Now, after Russia has effectively become a colony, Putin sings a very different tune. He says it is no big deal, that not only now, but for centuries, Russia has lived in dependence, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Let us remember the times of Alexander Nevsky. He traveled to the horde, bowed to the Khans, received a charter to rule. The horde behaved arrogantly and brutally.
And now Russian officials travel to China one after another, and Putin showers Xi with flattery and compliments.
Respected Mr. Chairman, I and the entire Russian delegation are glad to meet again. Thank you for the reception.
Alongside another Chinese vassal, Kim Jong-un, Putin walks behind his chairman at official events. Who is the emperor and who is subordinate is also made clear by Russian Prime Minister Mishustin, who likewise goes to bow in China.
The investor is our emperor.
They go there to beg for increased purchases of anything Russia can sell. And there is also the issue of legitimacy. They go to show that they still matter. It is a kind of charter to rule. They have to travel periodically and receive that charter from the Khan.
History is repeating itself, just as Putin himself once described it.
It was the same during 300 years of Mongol domination over Russia. They traveled, begged, kissed hands, licked dust from boots, received a little charter to rule. The habit is historical. 350 years on their knees. They put themselves in this position. Now Putin is paying the price for turning the country into a vassal of China.
By selling natural resources to China for pennies, Putin gets at least some money. With it, he buys components for the military-industrial complex and continues aggression against Ukraine. The dictator's interest here is obvious. So is Xi Jinping's.
Russia wants to buy 1 million drone engines. Chinese companies that produce drones and their components make money from these sales. Russia earns yuan by selling gas to China, which China uses for its own energy needs. Russia then uses those yuan to buy drone engines for use against Ukraine. China gets gas at a steep discount, and at the same time, sells the engines at a full market price, supporting its own industry.
But for Russia, this path is destructive. Already now, less and less money is coming from China. Russia's Minister of Industry Anton Alekhanov has said that trade volume with China has begun to fall, down 8% compared to last year. And the situation will only worsen. Discounts keep growing. China does not need as much oil, gas, and coal as Putin wants to sell. And each year it will buy less and less. Why buy more if it can supply itself? Recently, China discovered a major gas field.
They are very actively developing their shale hydrocarbon fields, faster than even the United States. They are ahead of everyone.
China's authorities also plan to reduce oil purchases. Consumption over the next 10 years is expected to fall by 40%. The country is rapidly switching to electric cars and electric trucks.
In terms of electric vehicle production, China has surged far ahead of everyone else. In absolute numbers, more electric cars are sold in China each year than in all other countries combined. And this growth is happening at an extremely fast pace. I believe renewable energy will expand just as rapidly.
China is rapidly building solar and wind power plants, constructing the largest hydroelectric stations in the world. Massive projects in every sense.
This will be a cascade of hydroelectric power plants with enormous electricity output. As far as I remember, around $67 billion will be invested in this construction.
And nuclear power as well. China is currently building dozens of new reactors. In the end, the Celestial Empire will gain hundreds of additional gigawatts of capacity, and it will no longer need Russian energy resources. Russia is already feeling the consequences. Russian coal producers, for example, are on the brink of bankruptcy. Kuzbass has been left without orders. And this happened precisely because China is sharply reducing its consumption of solid fossil fuels, gradually switching to cleaner energy sources, so that Chinese cities are covered by less coal smog. For now, China continues to buy coal only from territories bordering Russia, mainly in Transbaikalia. It is cheap to transport from there, and extraction is largely carried out by Chinese companies. The Zashulan coal deposit. From here, coal will be shipped to China by the thousands of trucks. A road is now being built for this purpose, cutting through hectares of protected forest.
The road runs straight through protected plant species.
Coal mining here will destroy the entire ecosystem, the river, and century-old pine forests.
Nothing will live here. No plants, no animals, no one. It will be a lunar landscape. That river will suffer, without question. And the Chakuya will not be diverted, because there is coal underneath it as well.
Not just a crime, a slap in the face of the local population.
Local residents were presented with a fait accompli. They will not even be allowed to approach the road being built.
It is 250 meters from my garden, and by their rules, we are not allowed to come within 250 meters of that road. So what does that mean? I step into my own garden, and I'm already breaking the law. Of course, we will not live here anymore. Everyone understands that. Because it turned out there is coal here that another country needs.
Chinese workers dominate the coal operations. Locals say they behave like barbarians. They treat both the people here and the land with contempt.
This is not their land. They have no reason to preserve anything or think about the future.
The people living here have been pushed to the brink of despair. And China is also buying up Russian timber on a massive scale. Siberia is gradually turning into a lifeless wasteland.
The authorities are destroying our most Russian taiga, unique protected areas across the country. Millions of hectares are sold to China like this. Destroyed.
China has become the world's largest consumer of timber, and Russia one of the leading exporters of wood. That is what this cooperation looks like. Meanwhile, China preserves its own forests, protects them from logging.
China has forests too. Let them cut their own and leave ours alone. People here see no benefit at all from China hauling away our timber.
But Putin does not care about people's opinions, just as he does not care that Russia is turning into a banana republic. Russia can barely trade anything except raw materials. Timber, oil, gas, coal. It produces fewer and fewer of its own goods and buys more and more from China. Clothes, shoes, phones. National wealth is traded for cheap consumer goods. This is neo-colonialism. Economists already compare Russians to natives and the Chinese to colonial powers of the 16th and 17th centuries who traded gold for glass beads. By the way, in recent years, Russia's gold exports to China have also grown significantly. Putin insists that trade between the two countries is mutually beneficial. On camera, he pompously signs agreements. But if you stop listening to Putin and actually read the texts, it becomes clear. These are empty words. Or, as was said earlier,
it is pure show. It is posturing.
Or rather, antlers. What do antlers have to do with any of this? One of the documents includes an agreement to supply China with live reindeer and their antlers, or exports of Jerusalem artichokes, berries, mushrooms, pine nuts. This is what Putin presents as major strategic agreements. Russia's trade balance with China is negative. In monetary terms, it buys far more from China than it sells. Russia exports cheap raw materials and imports high-value added goods, cars, for example. Chinese vehicles have flooded the Russian market and are pushing out domestic manufacturers. KAMAZ is on the brink of bankruptcy and survives only thanks to military orders. The situation at Avtovaz is just as grim. Russians buy its Lada cars less and less, no matter how much Putin promotes them.
Nice little car, comfortable enough, it works, easy to drive, it's good.
But Russians think otherwise.
30 kilometers on the odometer, straight from the showroom, and it breaks down.
Even Russian officials are outraged.
In the State Duma, we now have Lada Vesta cars. I drive one and keep hitting my head on the ceiling.
There is no money to develop Russia's own auto industry. it is hopelessly losing to Chinese competition. The same goes for other sectors. Garment factories are closing, shoe manufacturers are going bankrupt, and even those still operating are no longer producing genuinely Russian goods.
98% of registered light industry enterprises are pure fiction. They have no production facilities. Their registration system is absurd. They are formally listed as Russian light industry companies. In reality, they either do minor alterations or import goods from China and sell them as Russian-made products. China has effectively destroyed Russia's light industry.
This is not only independent experts talking, Russian industrialists say the same. At their forums, they try to get through to Putin.
Unfortunately, the share of truly domestic products is measured not in tens of percent, but in single digits of percent of total domestic consumption. Everything else enters the market disguised as domestic production, but in reality comes from our southeastern neighbor.
China has swallowed Russia's economy. The PRC is conquering Russia without firing a single shot. In border regions, Chinese workers already act like owners. At Chinese logging enterprises in Siberia, all managers and skilled specialists are Chinese. They earn good money, while Russians work as unskilled labor for far lower wages and without basic rights. People say even going to the toilet requires permission.
You are allowed to go at a set time, so go then. Otherwise, do not even think about it.
We used to be people. Now we're basically slaves.
In some Siberian settlements, there are already more Chinese residents than Russians.
Just look how many of them there are. They are everywhere.
They laugh at Russians.
Even now, there are many villages in Siberia where Chinese residents form the majority. They lease agricultural land by the hundreds of hectares for decades.
Chinese labor, Chinese raw materials, Chinese equipment, and exports go only to China. It takes total control and brings in its own workforce from China.
In Transbaikalia, Chinese language signs are appearing more and more often. Visitors from the Celestial Empire treat the region like their own province.
The Chinese have long been saying that Baikal is theirs.
For China, it is not Baikal, but Baihai. That is how it sounds in Chinese. And not Vladivostok, but Haishenwai. Not Blagoveshchensk, but Hailanpao. China has renamed several Russian cities on its maps. It restored their historical names from before these territories were incorporated into the Russian Empire in the 19th century. The decision was made by the PRC government. A circular from the Ministry of Natural Resources states that historical borders of China are drawn according to actual boundaries based on historical materials. Even Russia's own FSB now calls China an enemy. It sees a direct threat that the PRC could assert claims to Russia's Far East. All of this is laid out in an internal Federal Security Service document that became available to the New York Times through a leak. It speaks not only of China's historical territorial claims, but also of Chinese intelligence recruiting Russians with access to military secrets. Under the cover of academic and mining projects, Chinese actors are studying Russian infrastructure. FSB officers conclude that China poses a serious threat to Russia's security. These warnings are constantly reported to Putin, but the dictator simply ignores them.
No one's going to listen to FSB officers saying China is an enemy. Do not flirt with it. They tell Putin, and he says, what do you mean? Well, what can Putin say if he depends on China? And in the Kremlin, they tell them, we appreciate your strategic thinking, but take it somewhere else. Please roll up your work without text. Send it to the Kremlin. We will use it as intended.
By handing China control over its economy and natural resources, Russia is losing its sovereignty as well. Putin sold his country to China for pennies for the sake of an obsessive, manic idea of conquering Ukraine. Russia is no longer an independent state. Will Russians be forced to learn Chinese, hang signs with hieroglyphs on buildings, and raise Chinese flags? That is not the main point. The reality is they already live in a Chinese colony. A 21st century colony does not need the metropole's flag. It only needs exports dependent on one country and a budget tied to a foreign currency. The turn toward China gave the Kremlin short-term relief, but locked in the status of a raw material appendage. While Putin talks about sovereignty, the facts prove the opposite. Russia has become a province of China, and Putin a vassal of Xi Jinping. Maxim Orlapov, Special Report.